Welcome to JFK Facts Podcast, which features news, analysis, and discussion of issues relevant to the study of President Kennedy's assassination. My name is Alan Dale. Courtesy of the founder and editor of JFK Facts, Jefferson Morley, today we offer a special program with a special guest. Dan Hardway is an attorney who served as an investigator for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, in collaboration with colleagues Eddie Lopez and Gaten Fonzi. His assignment to investigate the CIA in relation to JFK assassination-related issues created a new database of research and a new era of intrigue and consequence relating to how certain agencies of the U.S. government respond to being investigated by Congress. He is the author of Lee Harvey Oswald, the CIA in Mexico City, also known as the Lopez Report. He is an occasional lecturer and essayist, and his writings may be found at the aarclibrary.org website under the title Dan Hardway Blog, Dare to Know. I'm grateful for the privilege of introducing Dan Hardway to JFK Facts. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Alan.
Well, grateful to you for agreeing to participate in this and for quite a lot more. I think that you're in kind of a pretty exclusive club among people who fought the proverbial good fight with a particular opportunity, a particular period of focus, and no good deed goes unpunished. So I'm grateful to you. Am I correct that in the aftermath, starting after your experience serving on behalf of the HSCA, that you, for a number of years, you kind of got out of the game? You were not participating really. You weren't visible in relation to whatever was going on in the JFK research world. Obviously, not until the early 1990s, the release of Oliver Stone's film, huge public outcry, resulting in the 1992 President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act, the release of millions upon millions of pages. We're still dealing with that during this year, 2021. But at some point, you kind of got back in to some extent, and I'm curious to know, when did that happen, or why did that happen?
Well, I can't tell you exactly when it was. It was in the early 2000s or late 1900s. Jeff had contacted me and wanted an interview, and actually what he wanted to know whether or not I could identify George Joannides in a photograph from the hotel lobby where
Ambassador Hotel. Yep.
Yeah, in '68.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't able, like I told him, I said, if there's any way that is Joannides, he aged an awful lot between 68 and 77 when I first met him.
Mm-hmm.
But I had not heard of Joannides, anything about Joannides since the HSCA had folded.
Right.
I'd had my run-ins with him. And as a result of running into Jeff and David Talbot that day, I found out everything that Joannides had been working on in '63, at least as far as they knew at the time. And I was just totally flabbergasted.
Yes.
I had withdrawn from any active participation in anything in the early '80s after I talked to one critic, and 2 or 3 days after I talked to a critic, I had my apartment broken into and everything that I had on JFK taken, and nothing else was taken. And so I had no documentation for anything so I couldn't back anything up, and I felt either betrayed or threatened or both.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just didn't have anything to do with it. And then on top of that, everyone fought like cats and dogs and argued with each other and yada, yada, yada. So I didn't have anything much to do with the assassinations stuff until they called me to testify. And when they called me to testify, I told them about documents that I couldn't find or that they couldn't find that should be there.
We're talking about Assassination Records Review Board.
Yeah. And then after that, I didn't say anything again. They called me up and told me that the records that I'd told them about didn't exist, and I was pretty amazed that those kind of records could be caused to disappear. And so I again didn't do much of anything. But when Jeff told me about what the agency had done to us with Joannides, I said, well, that's it. I'm done. I'll talk to anyone that wants to talk to me. I talked to Jeff and Dave Talbot simply largely because they wanted to ask me about recognizing the photo from
the ambassador.
The ambassador.
Yeah.
And consequently, they weren't asking me about any of the stuff that I've not talked about or hadn't talked about at that point, and wasn't really interested in talking about too much. Because everything I knew could be proved to be a lie because there's no records.
Imagine that. How convenient.
And at least the most critical things.
Oh.
So then when I found out about Joannides, I just said, forget it. I'm going to tell him what I know and what he did to us because it's obvious to me that he was a plant and he was there to mess us over.
Which he did.
Yeah, pretty effectively.
Ultimately receiving a commendation for a job well done. I think it's not inappropriate to give just a very brief recitation about what it is to which we're referring, how it is that Jeff Morley could have discovered something of astonishing consequence, something truly mind-numbing. And that is that you shared the experience with Gaten Fonzie, with Eddie Lopez, of approaching Mr. Joannides, who'd been designated midstream, appointed to become the new liaison, the person with whom you would be dealing. He's representing the agency, you're representing the HSCA. Somebody says to Mr. Joannides, we would like to find records associated with whoever is the case officer handling the Revolutionary Student Directorate, the DRE, with which Lee Oswald interacted in the summer of 1963 in New Orleans, Louisiana. Mr. Joannides' response was, I'll look into that. And not until Jeff Morley makes the discovery, because of the release of materials that's in evidence in the documentary record, with some unusual gaps, let's just leave it at that for the moment, unusual gaps in the documentary record. By God, there is the name of the person that you were seeking, and the name is George Joannides.
Well, yeah, the attempts to get the DRE case officer, that was spearheaded by Bob Blakey. And Blakey personally talked to Joannides at one point after they'd been told that they couldn't find any records and they didn't know, and that they no longer supported DRE after April of '63 and all these other things.
Right.
And Bob, in a face-to-face conversation, with George Joannides, was told by Joannides that they had so far been unsuccessful in finding any record about that, but that they would keep looking for him.
Oh, brother. It's brutal, man. I mean, it's quite something.
Well, because of the secrecy, there's not a whole lot that, we had no proof that what they were telling us at the time was a lie.
Right.
And we only found out that it was a lie when the ARRB released Joannides's
Hmm.
personnel records,
Yeah. So
and
whatever
we discovered what his assignments had been.
So whatever Professor Blakey thought he understood about a gentleman's agreement and the idea that we're all in this together and we're all working for mutual benefit and all of that, can you imagine how startled, how stunned he was when he got the call from Jeff saying, "Do you remember a guy named George Joannides?" Professor Blakey responded by saying, "Oh, yes, of course, I remember him." And Jeff said, "Do you know what he was doing in 63?" And Professor Blakey, if I understand it properly, basically he said, "Well, I'm pretty sure he wasn't involved in anything operationally." And Jeff's response, if I understand it correctly, was, "Well, guess again." At which point he told him what he'd discovered. I can only imagine it must have been kind of devastating for each of you. Did you and Eddie and Gayton commiserate? Did you get together? Did you communicate? I'm curious if you got together in some way to say to each other, "Can you believe this? Can you believe what Jeff just revealed, uncovered?"
Uh, I don't remember talking to Bob. I may have. Uh, I do remember pretty sure that I called Eddie after we discovered it. I may have called Gayton. Eddie may have called Gayton. I don't. I don't specifically recall calling Gayton, but I could have. I don't know.
Hmm. I have relatively handy um, something that is notable, and that is that at our conference, AARC, Assassination uh, Archives and Research Center, hosted this kind of remarkable gathering corresponding the 50th anniversary of the publication of the Warren Report, late September, early October of 1964. 50 years later, 2014, we all gathered at a nice hotel in Bethesda, Maryland. Professor Blakey was there. You and Eddie were there. You spoke. You actually read a letter from him. And I'd like to quote from that letter relevant to his reaction, the impact that this news about what Joannides was actually doing, having dual residency, by the way, having a home registered residence in Miami while he's assigned to JM Wave, also a residence in New Orleans at the time of the Oswald event. Um, so Professor Blakey's response, and I quote, "So my position about the agency is they didn't cooperate with us. They affirmatively made an effort not to cooperate with us, and therefore everything that they told us is a lie. And all the statements in the report about cooperation is just false. We were had." Professor G. Robert Blakey. That's quite a direct statement. Courageous, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Yeah, he's not pulling any
It
punches at that point. It's pretty strong.
it it takes uh, quite a bit of strength of character to admit when you were wrong.
Agreed. Agreed. Um, that you spent a lot of time. I shouldn't say that. You each the guys with whom you serve, the men and women with whom you serve, which includes people with names like Betsy Wolfe and Leslie Weiselman and other people who some of whose handwriting was much better than yours, by the way. But I'm not complaining. I'm just saying. Betsy Wolfe in particular. Uh, Malcolm refers to her handwriting as copper plated, that it was so beautiful to read, so legible. You met with a number of interesting figures. I believe you interacted personally with several senior CIA officers, including Ann Edgeter, and I'm not clear if you ever dealt directly with David Atlee Phillips. I assume you probably did. And
Yes.
Joseph Burkhalter Smith, who basically tossed yours or Gayton's credentials back at him and said, "Who the F is Congress?" Um, are there parts of that experience that you
No, he didn't quite say who the F. He said what the F. But
what right what the F right, yeah.
is
exactly.
Congress to the CIA. You'll be gone in 2 years, and the CIA will still be there.
Yeah, boy, hard to argue with that. That's there. It is in the fewest number of words. There it is, right there.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it was my credentials he tossed back, not Gaten's.
yeah. Should we talk about the perception, the misperception of the two young law students from Cornell who were introduced into this ultimate access to the corridors of power in Washington D.C. in the late 1970s, and now the two of you may not have looked the part, that they may have misjudged you guys because of your appearance or
And
because of the music that was playing in your. I picture basically a Volkswagen bus pulling up to the to Langley, beeping the horn for them to let you in. But what do you think that was with them looking at you guys and thinking, well, these guys are going to be light. There's no real reason to be concerned.
I don't know if they thought that or not. Uh, I certainly irritated them enough.
How?
Uh, well, they considered us arrogant and rude and overbearing and demanding and unsympathetic, and I think they
Had a
what
point.
was the what was I'm trying to remember some of the words that Breckenridge actually used in
Oh,
his
Scott.
complaints that he
Ugh.
made about us to our bosses.
God, I detest that guy.
Um, but yeah, they labeled us as arrogant and untrustworthy. They were very concerned that we couldn't be trusted with that which we wanted to know.
Oh, brother.
Or I think so the way they phrased it.
Hmm.
And they did everything they could to undercut us with members of the committee and with Bob and the staff. But the thing is I've got to say that through the whole process,
You were supported.
and even in the most difficult parts of it, Bob Blakey had our back.
Gotcha.
Now towards the end, when we things had gotten really pressing and tight, and the timelines were really tight, and we didn't have the time or the access to Bob that we had once had. I got to the point of where I was very upset with the way he handled things. But we'd gone to him with unprecedented access in the early part of '77, and we were very happy with what we were getting, which is how we got labeled as arrogant and
Mhm.
everything, because we were very demanding about the files we wanted, and when we wanted them, we were getting pretty good response from
Making
the handlers.
progress. Yeah.
Yeah, and
And then what
that
happened?
was before they brought Joannides in. And he slowed everything down
Hmm.
and started expurgating stuff and doing stuff that he wasn't supposed to do under the agreement. But by that time, we were in the thick of it, and we're under tremendous time pressure. And we'd already established with Bob and everybody that we were getting great access, and all of a sudden, we weren't, and we were complaining. But the CIA was turning around at the same time and starting this offensive against us, that we were arrogant and we were demanding, and that we didn't know what we were doing. And even with that, we got support from Bob, and we ended up issuing 3 subpoenas that never got enforced. But that's another story.
I'm
And
aware. Yeah.
and uh, so it's he had our back. We were on a steep learning curve. We walked in there with no clue about what we were doing. We just had an idea of what we were looking for based on previous work from other committees and what had been released and FOIA requests and stuff. And we started digging in, and no one offered us a course on CIA structure. I wish I'd known then what Malcolm knows
Boy.
now.
Yeah, I'll say.
And it's we had to try to educate ourselves at the same time as looking for what we were looking for. and it was long hours, but it was worthwhile.
Do you think
We made
because,
we made some progress,
do you
not
think,
a lot, but some.
well, good God, I mean, you created a brand new database, but like I said in the introduction, not only that, you caused to come into being something that is in and of itself revealing and informative with regard to how the agency responded once they realized that you guys were not effing around and that you were making progress and you were zeroing in somehow. The process is not familiar to me by which you were ultimately zeroing in on Oswald in Mexico City. And good God, what a can of worms that means.
Well, that was my assignment from like probably uh, February or so. I don't know exactly when it was that I was told that I was responsible for that section of the final report, and that wasn't what I really wanted to investigate, but that was the section that had to be in the final report. There had to be a section on Mexico City. And so that was my task. And basically, the agreement that I came to with Bob was that I could investigate anything else that I wanted to at the CIA as long as I kept up the work on Mexico City and getting that done. But the more I worked looking into Mexico City, the more it was obvious that it tied into some of the other things that I wanted to investigate. And so, I started digging deeper and deeper. The more questions you answered, the more questions you had.
Yes.
And especially since it was all like riddles because they weren't willing to help us, they didn't explain anything. Uh, the as I dug deeper and deeper into the areas of Mexico City, I started looking at other aspects of operations, how operations ran, uh, back channel communications, who was where, when, how the procedures worked, and things of that
In
nature.
surveillance.
Uh huh.
Surveillance.
And looking at some of that stuff, I started really looking into and pressing for information um, about back channel communications, about the surveillance that should have picked up Oswald, about what David Phillips was doing, and Phillips had originally come to our attention because of his preposterous stories about how he had handled the cable and all the lies that he told in his book. And one of the first things I did was establish that he had lied to the committee, and we called him back and confronted him with that. But the more I looked into Phillips, the more interesting he got, and that's how I started working with Gayton on Phillips and started trying to figure out some of that stuff. And
If he had not perjured himself, would he have drawn the same amount of attention by you?
well, yeah, if I'd have still found the documentation that said that he lied to us or he lied in
No,
his
I get
book,
that. Yeah, I get that.
he would have he was going to be a primary witness. I
Mm.
mean, the guy that should have been the primary witness, the guy that probably ran any operation in New Orleans, if there was an operation in New Orleans, was George Joannides. He had
Himself.
direct response. Yeah, he had direct responsibility
Hmm.
for for the for the DRE, and he was getting good reviews on his annual reviews for the excellent job he was doing controlling this difficult student group and getting them to actually engage in worthwhile and effective propaganda.
Hmm.
And that's there in the few documents that they have released.
Yeah.
It's hard telling what's in the documents that they refuse to release, or it's hard telling what he did with some of the documents because they claim they can't find them now.
Oh, it's a
But
nightmare. Yeah.
I was looking into their propaganda operations. Joe and uh, Phillips was running propaganda throughout the all. He was in charge of all the Western Hemisphere propaganda against Castro in Cuba. And so I started looking hard at some of the stuff he did. My idea was that if the assassination was planned in advance, then it was if it was not, then it was amazing the amount of propaganda that came out tying the assassination to Castro immediately after the assassination. So I started pushing hard, looking into that and pulling files, 201s on the names of people that I called from FBI files and from historical records that showed that they had been the source of newspaper stories that were designed to blame Castro for the assassination.
Pretty quickly.
And yeah, well, they came out the day after,
Yeah,
basically, the first one, which of course was DRE's article,
exactly.
the original conspiracy theorists.
Hmm.
And uh, and as I started running these names and these people and pulling their 201s, it became pretty obvious that all of them were being run or had some kind of an association with David Atlee Phillips.
Imagine that.
And it was just, you know, so I was pushing really hard on the back channel communications. There's a complicated story behind that. That is that when Oswald was in Mexico City, Phillips was actually in D.C. being promoted for his excellent work on his propaganda work at the same time that Joannides was being promoted for the same reason, and he had a manifest sent to him, untraceable manifest with a bulk mailing that was to be delivered to him eyes only.
In a pouch.
Right, which was why I was trying to find out about back channel communications and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was digging into.
Yeah.
I figured if I could show that there was foreknowledge as exhibited by the laying on of propaganda ops,
Yeah.
that it was a good way towards proving a conspiracy. It's not necessarily, I don't necessarily continue to hold that opinion about that particular thing, but the idea at the time is what motivated.
I understand.
And
Yeah.
and so they brought in a guy who would be able to best figure out what it was I was looking for and why,
Mm-hmm.
and to shut down my inquiries. And specifically my inquiries into those propaganda ops and those types of things. And he did a very effective job of doing just that.
Very effective. Do you
Yeah.
recall in detail the process by which a decision was made that you and Eddie should go to Mexico City?
No, I wasn't involved in that. I know I wanted to. I
Mm-hmm.
know we felt like we needed to interview witnesses,
Mm-hmm.
but the decision making would have been much higher than my pay grade.
You got paid? I didn't even
Yeah.
realize that. Right. Among the developments that came as the result of Oliver Stone's film, the creation of the Assassination Records Review Board, where you and Gayton and Eddie Lopez, you all testified. That testimony seems not to be available. Um, we've made requests.
The ARRB testimony.
Yeah.
Oh, I've seen it.
Do you have a copy you could send to me?
I don't know.
I don't think so. Uh, I'm curious if you were aware of an experience that either Misters Coleman or Slauson, one or the other of them, who had been sent on behalf of the Warren Commission to Mexico City, ostensibly to investigate whatever all that wacky hijinks at the Cuban consulate, Soviet embassy might have entailed. Whatever they experienced, my understanding is that they were not deeply satisfied about the quality of their experience. By the time they got back, they had more questions than they had answers. And in the period of the Assassination Records Review Board, one or the other of them, I think it was Coleman, I'm not certain, literally crossed his arms in response to a direct question. The question being, did you listen to audio tapes of Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City? And Mr. Slauson or Mr. Coleman, whichever one it was, crossed his arm and said, I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to discuss that. At which point Judge Thunheim, who was the chairman of the Assassination Records Review Board, he spoke up and said, no, actually, we are the final authority, and you are empowered to answer the question. At which point, whichever one of them it was, simply repeated what he had just said. Dr. Newman was in the room when it happened. He heard it, he witnessed it. The guy just said, I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to discuss that. Um, can you talk to us a little bit about what you had to contend with in terms of signing some kind of non disclosure agreement or taking an oath or something which maybe the ARRB had the authority to override?
Yeah, we signed secrecy agreements as part of our work, uh, and the AARB basically was given authority to waive those secrecy agreements.
But not everybody chose to avail themselves of that privilege.
I I couldn't speak for any of the Warren Commission staffers.
Yeah, I gotcha. Do you remember the process by which you would enter evidence, things like, let's say you have handwritten notes because you've interviewed one of these people that you were interested in interviewing them. Am I correct? Do I understand correctly that there's a process by which you would enter that evidence into something that ultimately would be the accumulation of all of that evidence in something they would refer to as the document register?
Yeah. Uh, well, I don't know about putting it in the document register. It wouldn't surprise me if they created a document register.
Right. Which,
But uh, but what we did was anything that we generated went into a safe room
oh,
and was maintained in safes, and the records were maintained by the CIA,
oh, really?
and they yeah all of our documentation was maintained under CIA
Oh,
control.
control.
We had to use it in their designated places.
I didn't. I'm not sure. I realized that. I kind of forgot about that. I assumed that there was a component, a registrar or some kind of
Well,
component,
Joannides says that
clerical.
that was what he was brought in to do, was to keep track of what we were asking for and to bring some orderliness to the process, which me and Eddie had evidently blown up completely.
Hmm. Great. Um, in 2014, again at this interesting gathering of interesting people, AARC uh, conference, you met Dr. Newman for the first time, and you had a conversation. Would it be impertinent or intrusive to ask if you remember a particular thing you said to him that really had a big impact on him about
That
operations?
wasn't that wasn't the first time I met Dr.
Okay.
Newman,
Hmm.
and that conversation actually occurred at a ARR or an AARC board meeting.
Okay.
And it was the first AARC board meeting that I went to. Jim Lazard invited me to come up for that,
Hmm.
and Dr. Newman was there.
And what did
And
you say
yeah,
to him?
well, we were just talking, and I talked about how the CIA routinely and regularly likes to hide one operation in another operation. It's part of the layered cover that they lay down in advance. It's part of the plausible deniability. It provides fallback cover stories for when the cover gets blown. It's not an unusual practice to find one operation working through another one. Of course, the classic example of that is the assassination operations that Harvey ran through ZR Rifle, which was actually the designation for his Staff D break-in teams.
Right, because it's about records, and so rifling through
No,
files.
no,
And
no, no, no,
no,
no, no.
okay,
The fact that there was that kind of a marginal relationship between assassination and finding and breaking in and stealing codes and stuff
right,
had nothing to do with the fact that Harvey put it in there. Harvey put it in there because Harvey controlled Staff D. He
which is
controlled those,
communication intercepts.
and they had to have some place to hide the funding for ZR Rifle, for the assassination aspects of ZR Rifle. And
Oh,
ZR Rifle was an existing program that was larger than just one assassination operation.
right.
And the easiest place administratively for him to do that, and one thing that Harvey was he was administratively lazy, evidently, fairly,
Hmm.
but not bad. I mean, he ran a pretty secure ship.
Yeah,
But
tight-lipped.
there's nothing in existence on ZR Rifle except a few handwritten notes.
Right.
And those handwritten notes tell us that there's not to be anything in writing on this.
Hmm.
And there's no real financial records of any sort, but the financial records that were there were hidden in the operational budget of the Staff D operations, and the whole operation was
Oh,
hidden in uh, in Staff D's existing operations. So
that's
you
cover.
know, sure,
Yeah.
and you saw that cover work when the Senate discovered the program, and they were initially told no. All Harvey was doing was recruiting safecrackers. Remember? Do you remember that? I mean, that was what they were told first, that the whole operation was all about. No. It's just
Right, right.
had nothing to do with assassination. It was just
That's for
recruiting
sure.
safecrackers.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it was just recruiting safecrackers. That's where it existed in the agency hierarchy. Of course, that was what that operation was about. All the other operations there were about that. So that's the way that works.
Boy, it's a different
It's not
mindset.
unusual.
No, it's not unusual. I get it. I understand. I appreciate you telling me. Um, Good God, there's so many deep areas. Oh Lord. Um, did you ever have face-to-face interaction with Scott Breckenridge, who was Office of Legal or
Oh
Legislative?
yeah.
I'll bet that
Oh
was
yeah.
sickening.
Scott was very proud of himself. That's about all I can tell
Yeah, I'm sure his parents were proud too.
you.
He's,
Probably.
yeah. I've always, well, I won't go into that. He was a consequential figure as far back as 1967, and
Yeah. He directed the IG
that's
report
exactly right.
investigation
Yeah, during
into
Helms.
in, investigation of the Castro assassination plot,
Hmm.
the mafia plot.
Um,
Interesting, isn't it, that Breckenridge shows up for Blakey as his liaison, and who knows where best to have the bones and the things are hidden in regard to the mafia and the CIA than Scott Breckenridge.
yeah, that is intriguing,
And
isn't it?
when we get into Mexico City and propaganda operations and those types of things, who would better know where the bones are hidden that you don't want found than George Joannides?
It's quite a effing one-two punch with those guys being primary
And
figures as liaison.
and and
Primary.
and and hold on just a second too. Let's go back even further. The primary interest in the Warren Commission inquiries was the possibility of Soviet involvement and the kind of things going on with the
Yes.
Soviet Union at the time. And
Uh-huh.
we've got this very highly sensitive defector that we also have to deal with. So
Irinosenko.
who's going to be best situated to know where the secrets are hidden that we want to keep?
Hmm.
Why, let's make
James Angleton.
James Angleton the liaison.
Pull the rug out from under John Whitten, who'd been working on it for 7 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that, and pull the rug right from under him. And Richard Helms having a role in that.
So you reckon you see a
A
pattern
pattern?
there?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think that's a good word for it, a pattern there. And obviously, effective results in each case.
Yeah.
Hence its reliable repetition. Look, you're being very generous with me with the time. Obviously, I mean, I could talk to you about these areas, your experience, your depth of understanding for days. I have to touch upon something that I think I'm very interested in your take on. You and I have spent an awful lot of time talking behind the scenes about aspects of these depths and these intricacies and these complexities. One of the biggest deals to of which I'm aware, associated with the 7 releases of materials between July of 2017 and April of 2018, is the news that at the transcript, I'll give you a short version. Short version is at the transcript level, materials in Mexico City are being falsified. Documents claiming to show transcripts of alleged telephone conversations that were picked up through routine surveillance of either the Soviet embassy, Cuban consulate, or whatever, that the station chief himself, Winston Scott, is engaged in a covert operation to create misleading documentation for the purpose of persuading the American ambassador Thomas Mann, I think, to Mexico, to persuade the government of Mexico at the time. Cuba is up to no good, and there's nothing but trouble, and there's going to be lots of nonstop shenanigans, and the best thing for everybody would be to throw Cuba the F out of Mexico City. And that Winston Scott himself is involved in this, as opposed to something going on where maybe Ann Goodpasture and David Phillips are involved in some hanky-panky through Staff D, but that probably Winston Scott's oblivious. Well, it turns out that in mid-1962, well, all of a sudden we've got documentation that Winston Scott himself is engaged in faking at the transcript level intelligence pertaining to Cuba for a particular objective. What do you make of that?
Okay. Yeah.
What do you think of
The
that?
the, the spies were acting like spies. I'm shocked. Absolutely shocked.
Uh, I'm telling you
I mean,
about
I'm flabbergasted. I have
that
no
shot.
idea what to
Yes,
say.
that there's gambling going on in this establishment. And here's your winnings, by the way. Does it do anything to influence your what I'm aware of, which is your quiet suspicion that maybe everything we take for granted about Boris and Anna Tarasov and the materials associated with the Oswald events and how they were transcribed, the sources of those materials, does it raise?
Oh yeah, I used to think that it was possible that he had an imposter and that some of the phone calls weren't made by him.
Of
But
course.
I think it's equally possible that some of the transcripts were faked after the fact. I still kind of like something Peter Dale Scott worked on, that was the two-stage operation in Mexico City. That idea
Mm-hmm.
still explains a lot of things about Mexico City, and it's something that's still potentially valid. It's not something I think we'll ever prove, but for some reason there's all these transcripts that didn't get identified to the Warren Commission folks that are there in the record, and their transcripts. Uh, you know, uh,
Exactly.
what can you say? I mean, it's there. When we start digging down at that level of the operations and everything that are in there,
Mm-hmm.
uh, we get to the point of where we're kind of like, what's the John Prine song? How's the lyric go? Often is a word I seldom use. And there's a lyric in there about dying in the hall of mirrors with no one there to close your eyes.
Oh boy.
And
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Angleton's favorite poet was T.S. Eliot.
Right.
He loved that phrase out of T.S. Eliot's The House of Mirrors,
Yeah.
And you get down in that level, and that's where you're at. You're at a house of mirrors. I mean, did the CIA put those in there? Did NSA put them in there? Did Mexicans put them in there?
Well, the DFS, the whole LI envoy thing going through the DFS. I mean, how secure was the DFS? It's notorious. It's so corrupt it had to be completely restructured and retitled.
Yeah, they wouldn't tell us anything about that. They refused to give us any information on the Mexican side of the operation.
I didn't realize that.
And when we went to Mexico City to interview people, they actively worked to keep people away from us. Even more so Eddie on the second trip. But, they were not cooperative. And, 2 years you'll be gone. And they were right. They just had to wait it out.
They had to wait it out. Look, I'm very grateful to you. This is so good. This is so wonderful that you're willing to allow me this privilege. Maybe we could do it again. Maybe we could do it some more because we devote aspects of our lives to this thing, and I think we would probably agree that we barely scratch the surface. It's worthy of continuing discussion, continuing effort, analysis. Is there anything with which you would like to close in terms of your attitude about where we are right now in the year 2021?
Where we are in the year 2021.
There's action happening that I'm not discussing too much publicly because it would be prematurely, but there's some stuff going on. There's some, the work is in progress, right?
Well, I'm not doing anything except a little bit of legal representation in the last two.
Uh-oh. Did I lose you? Oh my God, I did lose you. Where did you go?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
My pocket turned on the mute.
A likely story. You are so naive. They've been working on that in the technical services staff for decades.
They perfected it before they ever released
That's
the first
right.
file.
That's exactly. They perfected it before they really. Oh, don't get me started about what I have a friend who's a former senior agency officer, field officer, and his ranting and raving about self-driving cars. Let's just say his position is don't get in one.
I won't get in one. I try to stay out of one that has the modern computer in it. They can take it. They can hack the computers in the thing.
Yeah, but imagine one where it is driving itself and somebody who's got sensitive information in their head is a passenger. I mean, obviously it's a familiar, kind of science fiction theme that we're living through, if you call this living. In any event, look, I'm grateful to you. We will continue this discussion or these discussions. I'm hopeful we will. I'm certainly grateful to you, and I'm grateful to Jeff Morley for facilitating the means by which I have this privilege. Thank you, Dan, for participating and for all of what you have lived, which contributes to our understanding. And, as I sometimes say, on behalf of a largely indifferent nation, I truly mean it when I say thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
Okay. We'd like to thank you all.
Not that I did much.
I wouldn't say that. I'm sure Eddie
I
wouldn't say
would.
that. I'm sure Gayton wouldn't have said that, and I'm quite certain that Professor Blakey wouldn't say that. But I appreciate your humility. Work in progress. Stay tuned. We'd like to thank you all for listening. We invite you to join us at jfkfacts.org, where you will find updates on JFK related news with the goal of dispelling confusion and establishing an accurate record of the JFK story. Thank you for being with us.